What's up guys, hope you're having a good day. In this video we're going to be breaking down the fight between Jake Paul and Nate Diaz. We're going to be taking a deep dive into this matchup from a betting perspective, and I hope you find this video useful. If you like these breakdown videos and you'd like to see me do more of them for the big boxing matchups, hit the like button below and subscribe if you haven't already. Also leave a comment and let me know who you think is going to win this fight this weekend. I'd imagine that on this channel opinion is going to be quite divided, because obviously this is a tough fight for Nate Diaz, but we're all MMA fans. We absolutely love Diaz and we'd all love to see him do well, pick up a win this weekend. So leave a comment below, let me know how you think this fight is going to play out. And now let's take a deep dive into this matchup from a betting point of view. And as ever, I've gone through the last few fights of Jake Paul, watched him, taking a look at his strengths and weaknesses. I've also done the same with Nate Diaz, taking a look at his recent fights to try and visualize how he may look this weekend against Jake Paul. It's obviously a lot more difficult to do with Nate Diaz because this is his first fight in boxing. So we've got to look at his MMA fights to try and visualize how he may match up stylistically with Jake, which is not an easy thing to do. However, obviously one thing that does help is that Diaz has built a career off striking. He is predominantly a striker, primarily a striker, and so we still have an idea of some of his strengths and weaknesses coming into this fight with Jake this weekend. So let's kick things off by taking a look at the odds. We can see that Jake Paul is a pretty big favourite at average odds of around 1.24, which is going to be minus 417 for an implied probability of 81%. If we take a look at the odds on Nate Diaz, he's around an average of 4.20, which is going to be plus 320 for an implied probability of 24%. So Jake Paul is 26 years old, 6'1", with a 76-inch reach, and Nate Diaz is going to be 38 years old, 6 foot tall, with a 76-inch reach. So both guys roughly the same size, but there is a big difference in age. We can see that Jake Paul is going to be 12 years younger than Nate Diaz, and we know in MMA that the younger fighter wins around 70% of the time when there's a 12-year age gap in a fight. So with this also being a combat sport, you'd think the rules, or not the rules, but the trends around father time and the age and the time and the rate at which a fighter would decline in boxing would be pretty similar to MMA. And so Jake Paul being a lot younger than Nate Diaz is a big advantage for him coming into this fight this weekend. There's no other way to dress it up. So if you were to just blind bet statistics like that over the long term on combat sports, you'd probably do pretty well. So the age is definitely an issue for Diaz, and we do know that he's on quite a steep decline. If you go back and watch his recent fights in the UFC, he's definitely not as sharp as he used to be. He's a lot slower, not as aggressive, not as sharp. Reflexes have gone a little bit, but we'll get into all that in a moment when we break down how these two match up from a stylistic point of view in a bit more detail. So when Jake fought Tommy Fury, obviously we bet on Tommy Fury to win. You can see the thumbnail here. Tommy Fury will beat Jake Paul, and the title, Tommy Fury will beat Jake Paul. So Tommy came through for us at very nice underdog odds. I've got to be honest with you, this is one of those bets where even though we did win the bet, I was very surprised by how competitive the fight was. When I researched the fight between Tommy Fury and Jake Paul, I honestly felt that Tommy Fury was just going to completely outclass Jake Paul, and that wasn't the case at all. When I watched it live, it looked like a very competitive fight, which Tommy just edged. And then when I watched the fight back in the cold light of day this week to research this matchup against Nate Diaz, again, I was very, very impressed with Jake Paul. And the one thing that does make it difficult to bet on Jake Paul's fights is that he is improving at an incredibly fast pace. He is making exponential improvements from fight to fight. He's also changed his team, around him, his trainers, his head coach, that kind of thing, coming into this matchup so that he can develop new skills and new ideas, new strategies, new game plans, new techniques. And so I'd expect Jake Paul to look exponentially better this weekend than he ever has done before. One thing about a guy like Jake Paul is that they're going to be very good at improving and learning, because to reach the highest level of anything, it doesn't matter if it's making YouTube videos, boxing, doesn't matter what it is. Jake Paul knows how to improve and get better and learn from his mistakes, and you can really see that in the rate at which he's improving. In order to reach the highest level of anything in life, you've got to be very good at continually improving, learning from your mistakes. And so I'm not surprised every time we see Jake, he's a lot better than the last time we saw him, which makes betting Jake Paul fights tricky, because you never really know what you're going to get from him. Fortunately, we've got so much footage available on Nate Diaz that we can be pretty sure what to expect from Nate, even though this is, obviously a boxing match instead of an MMA fight. Now, when I came into researching this fight, knowing how slow and bad defensively Diaz had looked in recent years, and with Jake's performance against Tommy fresh in my mind, where he covered distance quickly, his cardio looked a lot better than it has in the past, fast hand speed, generated a lot of power, I really wasn't feeling like I wanted to bet Nate Diaz in this matchup. And I'll go into more detail on the technical aspects of why in a moment. But one thing that's really, really troubling about this fight from a betting point of view, one thing that really is giving me a headache, are the odds. If we take a look at the odds, it is very, very difficult not to find value in Nate Diaz. But this is one of those situations where I do think it's more likely that Jake Paul wins. So this is one of those fights where if you bet Nate Diaz this weekend, you're going to be putting your money in a lot of danger, because I don't feel he matches up particularly well from a stylistic point of view with Jake. Now, obviously, I always say we've got to let the odds do the work for us, right? And with Jake Paul being such a big favourite, carrying an implied probability of 81%, there's just no way that you can bet Jake Paul in a fight such as this. He's too big of a favourite, and the odds don't provide a good enough risk to reward ratio to warrant betting someone like Jake Paul. Maybe there's some props and stuff we can look at later on in the video, but in terms of the money line odds, for me in this odds range, Jake is off the table. But Nate Diaz is very, very interesting to me, because obviously this is a tough stylistic matchup for Diaz for reasons we'll get into in a moment. But to only give Nate, a 24% chance of winning, that just feels a little bit crazy to me. And I'll do my best to explain why I'm feeling like the odds are pretty wide here. So in actual fact, if we go to Jake Paul, if we go Jake Paul, Nate Diaz, 10 rounds. Okay, where are we? Okay, all right. So let's talk about how these two match up from a stylistic point of view. We know that Jake is very fast, very explosive, very powerful. He can cover distance so quickly. His hand speed is very impressive. He's very accurate, and he can deliver big knockout power. I was really impressed with some of the shots that Tommy Fury was able to absorb, because Jake caught him clean and hard in that fight multiple times, and Tommy was able to eat everything, and it didn't bother him that much. It wasn't like Tommy was in any trouble in that fight. And so Jake will pose a significant threat to Diaz on the feet. We know that Diaz has got an amazing chin. He's incredibly durable. If you look at Nate Diaz's MMA record, we can see that in, over 30 pro fights. If we scroll through his record, he's only been KO'd once against Josh Thompson, which ironically started with a head kick. So Nate Diaz has never actually been knocked out with punches. He's been stopped, obviously, due to cuts against Jorge Masvidal, due to an accumulation of damage. And that could come into play here because we know Nate Diaz has got a lot of scar tissue, so he does tend to cut pretty easily. But what's really impressive about Diaz's chin and durability is that in 34 pro MMA fights, he has never been knocked out with a punch, which is pretty incredible when you take into consideration the fact that, you know, he's been consistently competing against the best lightweights in the world throughout his entire career. And obviously he's been facing, you know, guys in small gloves. He's gone toe to toe with big power punchers like Conor, you know, wearing these small gloves, and no one has been able to knock Nate out. We've seen him hurt on the feet, we've seen him take a lot of damage. No one has been able to put Nate away. So that's really interesting to me, because while Jake is very dangerous, he does have big power. Jake doesn't throw the highest volume of strikes, and this is the main reason why we bet on Tommy Fury to beat him. You know, Tommy was one of these guys that just threw a much higher volume of strikes than Jake. Jake, for me, is much more of a single shot sniper. He throws reasonably good volume, but for the most part, he's looking to stay in a defensive shell and then wait for you to overcommit or make a mistake, and he's going to look to cover distance very, very quickly and counter you and catch you with that big shot. And I'm expecting him to do that to Diaz, because the speed difference in this fight is going to be absolutely enormous. We know Diaz is pretty slow. We know he's bad defensively, and at this stage in his career, you know, he's not going to be getting any sharper. His reflexes aren't going to be getting any better. So the speed, the reflexes really favour Jake in this fight. However, one thing that makes this matchup super interesting for me is that this fight is going to be 10 rounds. So Jake's fight against Tommy Fury was 8 rounds, and prior to that, in all of his other fights, he's never fought 10 rounds. So this will be the first time that Jake Paul will be fighting for 10 rounds. Now, Jake's cardio looked pretty good against Tommy. He wasn't able to match Tommy's pace. He wasn't able to match his volume. But, you know, even into that 7th and 8th round, when both guys were tired, it wasn't like Jake Paul was badly gassed or anything like that. And the fight was contested at a pretty high pace. Diaz is a little bit different, though, because Diaz has basically built a career off forward pressure, aggression, and volume, right? Diaz has never put the most volume, or has never been the biggest power punch, right? Doesn't hit the hardest. But what Nate Diaz does do a pretty good job of is absorbing damage and continuing to come forward and chip away at you with those shots to the body, the jabs. Just very good at outworking you, breaking you down, and wearing you out, essentially. And throughout Diaz's career, you know, we've seen him face guys many, many times who are faster than him, more technical than him, more powerful than him. And in the early stages of these fights, when he wasn't able to match their speed, their power, their technique, he would always struggle. But Nate's path to victory has always been just staying in the fight, just hanging in there, and just staying alive and just continuing to come forward and wear his opponent down. I feel that with Nate, the longer fights are, the more chance he has of winning. Because we've already seen he's never been knocked out with punches in 34 pro fights. Of course, he's never fought in boxing. There's a first time for everything. But that in itself is quite impressive. And so, this is one of those matchups where it is a bad stylistic matchup for Diaz. But you really have to question how Jake Paul is going to react. If he continually catches Diaz with these big, clean, hard power punches that have been enough to knock other guys out, and Diaz is able to just hang in there and stay alive and keep coming forward round after round after round after round, irritating Jake Paul with a jab, going to those big ripping combinations of the body that we know Diaz likes to throw. Is Jake the kind of guy who can stay composed and not panic and not adrenaline dump and stay in the fight? And will his power, his technique, and his speed be able to overcome the forward pressure, the aggression, the volume of Diaz? I'm not so sure. But what I do know for a fact is that these odds are a little bit wacky. There's no doubt that there's no doubt that Jake Paul should be the favourite in this fight. But should he be this big of a favourite? I mean, these odds are kind of crazy to me. For me, it is very, 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 very difficult not to bet Nate Diaz at these odds, especially in a 10-round fight. It's a long time. And we know Diaz does his best work when he's got a long period of time to wear guys out, break them down. But it is a bad stylistic matchup for him, technically. If he can hang in there early, drag Jake into the second half of the fight, I do think things get very, very interesting. We also know that Diaz is very confident in his ability. He's not going to be phased by eating big shots, or if this turns into a war. If anything, he'll thrive in the chaos. So it's a very, very interesting fight. It's one of those fights where, just to sum it up, it's one of those fights where if you like to value bet, I do think there's a good amount of value on Nate Diaz this weekend. But I think it's more likely Jake Paul wins. Hope that makes sense. I'm probably going to be betting Nate Diaz this weekend. It's not a bet I love. I recognise I'm putting my money in a lot of danger, but it's just very difficult for me to pass on Diaz in this odds range. So now let's take a look at some of the prop bets, and we can go through these and see what we've got. So we can see that in terms of the over-under, the bookies don't believe this one's going to go to a decision, which I find interesting. I do find that interesting because that would suggest they believe Jake Paul is going to win by knockout, which is super interesting because Diaz has never been knocked out with punches before, ever. I understand boxing's different. Diaz isn't going to be able to go to the ground to recover, or there's not as much space to circle away from your opponent and cover up. If he gets knocked down, he's not going to be able to stay in his guard and kind of weather the storm. I do understand boxing's a very different sport, but it's very rare you see Diaz wobbled from punches. Jake does hit hard, but it's an interesting one. It is a very, very interesting one because with Jake being the favourite and the odds on fight not to go to decision being the favourite, the bookies really feel that Jake winning by knockout or TKO is the most likely. Is Jake going to be the first guy ever to knock Diaz out with punches? I don't know about that, man. Jake's dangerous, but I don't know about that. I mean, look at how steep the odds are on Jake to win by knockout or TKO. That's kind of crazy to me. I feel if you really, really, really want to bet Jake this weekend, I would just take him by decision because I feel these odds are pretty good. I think that it's possible that Jake Paul could get a stoppage off like a cut or something like that because, Nate Diaz does have a lot of scar tissue. He does cut very easily. But I would be surprised if Jake just straight up knocked Diaz out. Would he be the first guy to do it? Ever? I don't know about that, man. Like I say, the Josh Thompson knockout was off a head kick. So, for me, that's a little different. Very, very interesting. Very, very interesting. So, yeah, Jake by decision is a decent prop you might want to look at. Diaz to win by knockout or TKO isn't that bad if he can kind of wear Jake down and he gets the point late in the fight where Jake is too tired to defend himself. Yeah, those are some props that I like. So yeah, I think probably the best value prop, probably Jake Paul to win by decision. like I say, he's more likely to win. I do lean towards Jake winning. But will he be the first guy to KO Diaz with punches? I mean, that's a stretch for me. So anyway, hope you found that breakdown useful. Let me know what you think in the comments below, because this is a fight that has given me a headache. I don't like betting in situations where I'm not betting on the guy that I think will win. It's very, very uncomfortable for me. I would much prefer to be betting on the guy that I think is most likely to win. That's not the case here. I think Jake is most likely to win, but these odds on Diaz are very, very attractive, and I do believe present us with quite a good amount of value. So let me know what you think in the comments below. If you want to do more of these boxing breakdown videos, please hit the like button. Subscribe if you haven't already. Take care, everyone. Love you all, and I will see you all very, very soon. Nice one, guys. Bye.